cast on Friday, we got the news of what was happening in Paris, and we interrupted most of the local broadcasting to get in line with everything that was going on overseas in Paris. Obviously, there was a rather major terrorist attack that happened in Paris, and we covered that one as best we could in the first hour of its occurrence. And there have been a lot of questions now that are being posed, sort of post-Paris, I guess. There's been a lot of questions that have been posed about how could this happen? How did it happen anyway? How were they communicating? There's another one. Why did nobody catch it? And I'm not going to make this into a political argument because that seems to be very premature and disrespectful, especially considering everything that's happened. And then to turn some tragedy like this one into a political point seems to be kind of, well, it seems to be disrespectful, I guess, is the best way for me to put it anyway. I don't feel comfortable doing that. So let's do a bit of a technical analysis of what happened and what didn't happen, maybe, and what could have happened, perhaps. And this is not passing judgment on anyone in any agency. This is just what we can discern may have happened. So if you were reading the news, you read possibly that the jihadis were communicating over the PlayStation 4. Now, that's kind of odd. Certainly, that's not my method of choice for communicating with other people, but hey, whatever. So the PlayStation 4 was supposedly the communication device of choice for these perpetrators of these events. Now, what reasoning would you have for that? Well, the PlayStation 4, if you're communicating over voice chat, does act as a viable platform for VoIP, so that makes sense. It's just not what I would think of. That's being routed, I would assume, through Sony servers and then to whoever you're attempting to communicate with. So it makes sense. It's just not something that I would think of. So okay, there's that. But then there's the question of why did nobody catch on that this was happening? Because that's sort of the big question, is why did nobody catch on that there was an attack going on? Well, the details aren't out yet. That's kind of the thing. This happened, 3 days ago? Not even. So there's a lot that hasn't come out yet. Remember, this happened on a Friday night, and this happened 2 to 3 days ago now. So this is French time, so it's a little bit off from what we're used to, but it happened about 2 to 3 days ago. And the details are just not in yet. In fact, they're probably still hunting people down at this point. So we don't know everything that's going on in Paris, in Belgium, in the rest of France. We heard that there was someone who was apprehended. I've heard 4 is a number that I've heard too thrown around. People apprehended who were supposedly members of ISIS, or at least some sort of cooperative with ISIS, or some sort of connection going on there. At least 3 people were apprehended is what I heard. So it's interesting too, because immediately following this, the French Prime Minister came out with a statement saying that, there's going to be essentially there's going to be a war, is what he said. There's going to be retaliation. That's what the Prime Minister said. Now, again, that is an interesting statement to make immediately after this happens, but it does make sense in the heat of the moment. And then the president came out with sort of a not really nondescript statement, but we came out with a statement saying basically, we stand with the French and we're going to do everything we can to help them. And your standard fare. Basically, it's your standard post-tragedy statement. It's understandable he made it, and I don't fault him. It's just what politicians do. They make statements like the one that the president made. So all this is going on all at the same time, really. And while the president's making his statement, and the Prime Minister of France, President of France, they have a president and a Prime Minister in France. While all this is going on, the president makes his statement, and then the president of the USA makes his statement, and everything seems to be very hectic. Now, again, we're wanting answers immediately, but we have to keep in mind that we're probably not going to get them for maybe even months from now. And that's the sad thing of it. And we're still getting details about what happened in Chattanooga here. So the details are going to be scarce. And this is and I'm not trying to downplay what happened here, but this is technically a much bigger event than what happened here in Chattanooga. Now, both are tragedies, right? That's not downplaying what happened here, but on a technical level, what happened in Paris is on a much bigger scale than what happened here. So the investigation is most likely going to take even longer. I'm not familiar with the French legal justice system. I imagine it's somewhat similar to what we have here, but it's going to take a long time. That's just a hard fact of it. So on the technical level, on a communications level, we're wondering how this got organized without anyone noticing, because we keep hearing all these stories about how different agencies are catching terrorists and all these sorts of things, but we're not really seeing a whole lot of evidence of that. Now, again, we do have to keep in mind that this is France. It's not the United States. France doesn't have the NSA, as an example, but this sort of does downplay the US's role as world police, as we like to think of ourselves. And I guess it's just disturbing. The whole thing is really just disturbing. So I guess that's my take on it so far. And we'll bring you more updates on what happens in Paris, of course, as we can here on Hot News Talk Radio. We brought you updates. If you want to watch the live coverage, you can go to YouTube and then search for it. It should be under I think I listed it under Paris suicide bombing because that's what it was. The headline was at the time. So if you look on Hot News Talk Radio, you can see that there. Well, there's some big news coming out of Google that Google might have a watershed announcement coming up soon. So this is coming out of the IB Times UK, by the way, but Google is planning a watershed quantum computing announcement sometime in December. So a watershed announcement from Google regarding quantum computers is now expected to be made on the 8th of December, according to a board member of the quantum computing company D-Wave. Steve Jurvetson gave no other details about what Google is planning, though his comments were related to an image projecting the predicted exponential progress of quantum computing over the next few years. Now, that's all very nice stuff, but we're not seeing any sort of practical application for quantum computers as they exist now, right now. So possibly this is going to be the watershed announcement, as Google is now using quantum computers in search results or something like that. That would not be terribly surprising to discover. He says, stay tuned for what may be a watershed announcement from Google on December the 8th. That's what Jurvetson wrote in a recent comment to the image he posted on Flickr more than 3 years ago. First spotted by Google News site 9 to 5 Google, Jurvetson's remarks come as D-Wave announced the 1,000 plus qubit quantum computer has been sold to a national security research institution in Los Alamos. Oh boy, so that's all the government needs is more quantum computers, right? Or more computational power in order to do whatever it does. Jurvetson's Flickr image depicts Rose's law, which mimics Moore's law in charting the growth of computational power of quantum computers over time. According to the graph, extrapolated from data points taken from previous quantum computing milestones, the point at which quantum computers surpass conventional computers should be in the very near future. Should be being the main factor. Now, I've heard speculation about the quantum computers versus conventional computers, which use silicon. One is that quantum computers are really good at some things, but not good at others, and can't truly ever surpass silicon because they're just good at some things, but not at others. It's very specialized. Now, I'm not a quantum mechanics physicist by any means, so I'm not entirely privy to how quantum computers work in the first place. So it's difficult for me to discern, what's going on with this. Is this how it works? Is that how it works? I don't know right now. But if it's true that quantum computers are going to be surpassing regular computers soon, that could be an interesting development, but it makes me wonder about scale. Because we talk about how, these quantum computers are going to be much better than regular ones, but scale is very important. Because if they're better than regular computers, but the scale is the size of a warehouse, that's not really useful to me because I can't carry that around in my pocket or have it in my living room or anything like that. So scale is going to be one of the more important factors. Even if it doesn't perform as well as a regular computer, if you can scale it down to the home level, that's at least going to get the consumer attention on it. And that's almost as important, in fact, possibly even more important than the actual technology itself working. Because if people buy it, they don't really need anything else. I mean, look at Macs. They don't really work that well, but people buy them. So, hey. But no, it's, in case you couldn't tell, I'm not a big fan. If we suspended disbelief for a moment and use D-Wave's early data on processing power scaling, then the very near future should be the watershed moment where quantum computers surpass conventional computers and never look back. Moore's law cannot catch up, Jurvetson said in his recent post. A year later, it outperforms all computers on Earth combined, double qubits again the following year, and it outperforms the universe, meaning it could solve certain problems that could not be solved in any non-computer or non-quantum computer, even if the entire mass and energy of the universe was at its disposal and molded into the best possible computer. Despite such theoretical potential, quantum computing researchers are yet to build a general-purpose quantum computer, which means one that we could use. Before this can be achieved, a hybrid quantum/classical algorithm needs to be developed. Researchers at Microsoft recently suggested that this advance could be up to a decade away. While it will be fascinating to see if the next 3 years play out like Rose's prediction for today, Perhaps all we should say is that it's not impossible, Yurvitson concluded in his Flickr post. And what an interesting world this may be. Now, something to keep in mind about computer development too is that you might have a physical quantum computer, but you might not have a high level language for it where you can actually write decent programs. Yeah, you can make a quantum calculator, but that doesn't really help us a whole lot with other things, because a quantum computer, while it's cool on a physical level, needs to have good programs. And if it doesn't have good programs, people aren't going to buy it. So you need to have a programming language that is open for everyone to build upon and open for interpretation, I guess, by other people, so that we can change the code around and adjust programs and learn from that. And that's going to take a long time, because we have computer codes and computer programs and programming languages is what I'm trying to say. We have programming languages for computers today, but it's taken a long time for us to develop all that we have. Sorry, I'm a little bit congested. It's taken a long time for us to develop all which we have. So that sort of hurts things when it comes to thinking about a new kind of computer, right? So what do we do then when we have this great hardware, but nobody's written any actual programs for it? It doesn't really help us out any, does it? Like, you have this great thing, but you can't really do anything with it. It's like a Ferrari with no gas in it. It's like, well, it's really cool looking, and I'm sure it does great things, but we can't really do anything with it. So, it's, I don't know, it's a weird situation, because this is the new platform, the new frontier, we could assume, of computing. Everything can change in the next 10 years in terms of computing power, and we could be left behind in a cloud of dust when we think about today's computational power, which is nil compared to what could be coming up soon. So it's great stuff, but it's also kind of it's kind of worrying also to think about all this computational power and who can use it. You know, who could use all this power? Who is going to use it for what? Would be another question. Because we have to think about too the history of computers and the history of why computers that we have today were built. The US Air Force supposedly had a silicon chip actually before researchers at Intel built one. And that's kind of weird to think about. Government builds a lot of stuff that we're not privy to that's technically superior to what we have. It's almost like another world, kind of. It's like a whole nother planet. When you look at the history of, say, the 1960s computational power versus what we have today, it's like a whole nother planet. But I was reading the other day, or actually, sorry, I was talking to my next door neighbor the other day, who happens to be a scientist, and we were talking about the computational history, I guess. And one thing he pointed out was that, yeah, they had silicon chips and they had all these different technologies even back in the 50s and 60s, but the two schools weren't really allowed to talk to each other, because you had the software engineers and then you had the hardware engineers, and you had all these different engineers, and they were very compartmentalized to keep them from talking to each other, which really kind of stifled innovation. Plus, they were working for a state, so there's not really a whole lot of incentive to be better when you're working for a state institution. So it led to a situation in the 50s and 60s where computational power was really kind of stifled. We didn't see a really big leap until the late 70s. And imagine where we might have been had we made that leap in the 50s or 60s instead of the 70s. What if it was 1967 when the Apple II came out, just as an example, instead of 1977? We would be 10 years ahead in what we have today. So imagine smartphones as they exist today existing in, say, 1997 instead of 2007. How different would things be today? And that would be astounding. Like, the possibilities are just immense. Everything would be different today. It's funny to think about how computers really do shape everything we do. Nothing is the same now post 1977. Nothing. I usually clock 77 as basically the baseline year for when personal computers became really viable. Now, there were other personal computers before the Apple II, for certain, but I generally count the Apple II as where the public sort of picked up on it. And maybe I'm a little bit mistaken in that, but that's generally my year zero for this sort of thing, is 1977. And then from then on, the public was aware and able to use, for the most part, computers like we have today. It's led to a whole new way of thinking, too, about obsolescence and about how things are obsolete suddenly, because we're used to it. Now, our generation is used to it. But think about your grandma in the 90s who bought a computer, right? And then 2 years later, or 5 years later needed to buy a new one and didn't because the old one works just fine, right? And it's hard to explain, like, no, see, this computer you have is outdated and you need to buy a new one. It's like, but why? This one works just fine. And it's hard to explain to that generation that things become obsolete. Like, they would drive cars until they fell apart and then they buy a new car. And they would use house appliances before, they wore out and they had to buy new ones. Now it doesn't work that way. We're used to this culture of sort of disposability, I guess, where we buy a smartphone and it might still work, but we'll get rid of it and buy the new one because the new model has come out and the new version of Android or iOS has come out that's not compatible with our old phone or with our old computer or whatever. So it's kind of funny, actually, because it's a whole new way of thinking that we have today that was not there before. We've become very consumerized, I guess. We are very much the ultimate consumer culture today because we don't even think twice about throwing away something that works and then buying the new thing. We don't think twice about it. It's just how things work today. And it's funny too because you have people who are in the political field of like, well, I'm a communist or I'm a socialist and I don't believe in yada yada, and they use iPhones and they use Macintoshes and all these different things, and it seems very hypocritical. You can't, you have to work in the capitalist society. You kind of have to. You have to operate in a capitalist society because otherwise you can't have anything. It's kind of funny how that works out, actually. Even people who are communists are actually secretly capitalist because they're using iBooks and they're using their Macintoshes and they're using their iPhones. They have to, because that's how the world operates. It's funny, actually. I mean, even Karl Marx was really quite a capitalist when you look at how he was in his old age. He started pawning off a lot of his items and gaining money so he could afford to write more books and all these different things. Marx was actually kind of a jerk, honestly, but you can read about that some other time. No, but technology has changed how we have done everything. Nothing is the same now. Warfare, especially, is completely different. And that's sort of the main thing that I wanted to get to, actually, is computers used in warfare, which is the new big push, I think, for computers. This is where the interest is going to lie for a government wanting a quantum computer, because there is an arms race, but it's more of a computational arms race than an actual physical arms race, where it used to be, say, the French developed smokeless powder, and now the French are light years ahead of everyone else using black powder, or this country has repeating arms, and this country is using these repeating arms, and so it's just unfair that this country has repeating arms. And you had steel cased ammo, or you had metal cased ammunition. You weren't pouring powder down your barrel anymore. It's light years ahead. Now, really, the small arms have not changed in the last 50 years. We're still using M16s and M4s, and we're still using the same sidearms. The Beretta M9 is based on oh gosh, what is it? It's the not the Mauser C96, it's a different gun, but it's based on actually an old German Nazi era handgun. That's what all Beretta actions are actually based on. It's not really anything new. It's all, the technology is all basically the same when it comes to the small arms. Now, the larger arms, the armament has changed quite a bit, but the small arms are exactly the same. Rifles and handguns are the same as they have been for 50 or even 60 years. What's changed is how we're doing tactics, how we're figuring out how to move this troop to where, and how we're using these tanks to move here, and these planes to here, and these blockades to over here. All these different things. These are changing. That's what's the big push now. And that's why different governments are wanting to get their hands on these quantum computers, because this is the next big push. The first government which can come out with, or first country which can come out with the first viable quantum computer which can be used for strategic planning is now light years ahead of any government that's still using silicon chips. And good luck getting a quantum computer if you're a smaller government, because they are hugely expensive. So you're not going to be seeing like Venezuela with the world's first quantum computer. It's probably not going to happen. It's going to be the US or China or Russia, most likely. Those three countries are going to be the countries which are going to have them. And so it's leading to a computational arms race, which is possibly much more important than an actual physical one, because even if you're outnumbered, if your tactics are better, you can still possibly win. So it's a weird world we live in where everything is driven by the machine. Everything is driven by the machine. I can't think of one aspect of life that's not driven by computers somehow. It's a bizarre world we live in. And I guess you could say that it's quite a modern world, Hey, don't forget the Keon Rose is coming up next after me from 1 to 2 right here on Hot News Talk Radio. He's our resident sports expert. He's going to be talking about sports and stuff here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. Don't forget the TuneIn Radio app.
This is a modern world. This is the modern world. What kind of fool do you think I am? I think I know nothing of
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
Here you are, working to keep your customers happy and to manage your cash flow. IRS problems are the last thing you need, but here they are, flapping about you like vultures. Get help from Eric Pelton and his team of accountants at E.J. Pelton Company. Audits, letters, proposed return changes, 1099s, penalty threats. Pelton Tax Resolution Services brings peace of mind and helps you keep more of what you've earned. EJPelton.com. Offices on Brainerd Road and in Saudi Daisy, just north of the Bilo. That's EJ Pelton. Call 622-3156. Think ahead, 622-3156.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Costa, host of the Costa Report, every Sunday at 9 a.m. My guest this week is former Congressman from Ohio, Dennis Kucinich, who says a Department of Defense is not enough. The United States needs a Department of Peace, which is committed to avoiding wars. Is Kucinich onto something? Find out this Sunday at 9 a.m. on the Costa Report, right here on AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
This is America Now with Meghan McCain.
President Obama makes Jimmy Carter look like Napoleon Bonaparte. We have a president that leads from behind, and when America doesn't lead, bad things happen.
Meghan McCain, weekdays at 7 p.m.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays.
Fox News Radio, I'm Carol McHugh. Responding to the attacks in Paris, President Obama says we are in this fight for the long haul and that the U.S. will stay the course in the fight against ISIS.
The strategy that we are putting forward is the strategy that ultimately is going to work. But as I said from the start, it's going to take time.
The president held a press conference in Antalya, Turkey at the close of the G20 summit. He's on his way to the Philippines and Indonesia next. Meanwhile, those who plotted Friday's Paris attack say there's more to come.
An 11-minute video produced by ISIS and posted online vows to attack everyone who has bombed us. A translation suggesting threats to Rome and Washington, D.C.
Fox's Jared Halpern, 129 people were killed, more than 350 wounded, many critically. French President Hollande says he will meet jointly with U.S. and Russian leaders to discuss the possibility of joining forces to take on ISIS. Fox News, we report to you.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
So the idea of passive versus active in terms of sensors and shielding is kind of an interesting one. It's mostly been breached in sci-fi, actually, is where I read about it most often. But now we have, I guess, active stealth as opposed to passive stealth. And it's really kind of fascinating. Chinese researchers have now developed a new aircraft skin that's making planes, I should say, even harder to see on radar. Published this week, the technique makes the plane skin that can adapt to different radar frequencies and react to them, the radio wave equivalent of chameleon skin. Current airplanes and even some weird wind turbines hide their appearance from radar in two ways: weird body geometry that would reflect radio waves away from the receivers, and materials that absorb the waves, instead turning them into heat instead of reflecting them back. That's seen primarily on modern aircraft like the B-2 Spirit bomber, the F-22, and the F-35, and even experimental X-47B, which is a drone. The technology is used by the Pentagon to project nuclear bombers, spy planes, and the entire next generation of fighters as well. But even after billions and billions of dollars spent on it, it has its weaknesses. And one of those is ultra-high frequency radar, which can pick up traces of the plane, which other radars might miss. There's now a paper that's been published called An Ultra-Thin Broadband Active Frequency Selective Surface Absorber for Ultra-High Frequency Applications that was published this week in the Journal of Applied Physics. And it's detailing a material just 5/16 of an inch thick, which can safeguard stealth planes against UFH detection. And the material tunes itself to a range of detection frequencies, protecting against a large swath of radar scans. So why publish this information? Why this should be Chinese secrets? Well, there are a few possibilities. Sharing the research lowers a major obstacle for other countries that may want to build their own stealth fighters. Alternatively, by publishing the research, China makes it easier for anyone trying to break stealth protection like this, as they have the technique publicly available to dissect. One of the best ways to find flaws in defenses is to give a lot of eyes looking for weaknesses. So China has developed this new stealth technology and then subsequently given it away. There is another possibility, which ibtimes.co.uk, which is what we read that from, didn't get into, which I think is possible, not really likely, but possible. And that is that perhaps China has already a better system. And so throwing this away is sort of a show to other governments that, look, we had this technology and now we've moved on to much better technology. That seems to be the implication there to me. But who knows? So it's odd to think about that the Chinese now have this technology which can essentially shield them from any sort of even ultra high frequency radar and even sonar detection. So it's weird. It's just really weird to think of all these different methods of detection and then ways to obfuscate yourself and all these different things. And it's really a battlefield of technologies now more than anything. And of course, the different contractors are very happy about this because it means that Boeing gets a $100 million contract, and then some other company gets another $100 million contract, and Lockheed Martin and all these different companies are getting all these contracts. So they're not complaining over there, I'm sure. So there's a Google engineer who's been pretty vocal actually about different USB cables and which ones you should buy and which ones you should not buy. And he's really upset about poorly designed USB Type-C cables. What's a USB Type-C cable? Well, it's actually the new generation of USB. It's actually USB Mini Type-C, USB 3 Mini Type-C, technically. What it is it's the new kind of USB cable, which is, of course, much faster than what we're used to using. If you're using 2.0 or even regular 3.0, it's quite a bit faster. And it's also, this is the kicker, reversible, meaning you don't have to worry about how you plug it in anymore. And Apple has put one on its MacBook Air. There's a USB Type-C plug on the MacBook Air, and one of the Chromebooks has two of them, one of which it charges from. Yes, you can actually charge your laptop with a USB Type-C connector. Pretty cool stuff. So this is now the new USB plug of the future, it seems, and I'm happy about it. The problem is I don't have one, and I don't have a USB device that's compatible with it, so yeah, oh well. But perhaps the Motorola Generation 4 will be compatible with it, and I'll buy it in the end of this year, and then I'll be happy. So I have to wait and see, I guess. But no, I'm really excited about USB Type 3, but I haven't, or Type C, but I haven't really seen anything using it so far in the mass market. And that's going to be changing, obviously, as times go by, and people are really hyped about it. But one problem that we're having is poorly designed cables. Now, let's think about how USB works. To use USB, to manufacture USB cables, you actually do have to sign on to a set of standards that was set by, I can't remember what the commission was, but I believe it's actually governed by the International Standards Organization. But it's a standard, basically. It's not government set, it's a corporate set standard, and it's a standard. So if you're going to build a USB branded cable, like if it has the little USB logo on it with a circle with a trident and the square, you have to follow these particular standards. And if you don't, you're in violation and you can be fined quite a bit of money. Sounds great, right? Well, sometimes you can sort of skirt that and use subpar materials while still technically being in spec. And we see that a lot with phone chargers, where you've noticed that your phone charger sort of falls apart after a while. I noticed that problem a lot with USB Mini B, which is what we use to charge our Android phones. They fall apart all the time. They're not nearly as bad, though, as the old Apple chargers on the 4 and lower, I believe. That was the long sort of connector that was white. That thing fell apart so much. And even that wasn't as bad as the yo-yo connector for the iMacs, or the iBooks, I should say. Those fell apart even more, because if you ever even touched it, it would just fly apart. It was terrible. And then you got those magnetically connected charging cables for the MacBooks, which are a good idea. But the problem is, if it becomes unplugged and you have a crappy, iMac or iMac, no, not iMac, MacBook, it gets so confusing. Then the thing just shuts down. And I have had that happen to me too. And I know several other people who have had that happen. So charging cables are really important. They are literally the lifeline for your phone. And for some reason, we keep engineering really bad ones. Well, there's a Google engineer who is very upset about this and is actually calling out one brand specifically. Earlier this month, the website The Verge covered the exploits of Benson Lung, who's an engineer at Google, who's been reviewing new USB Type-C cables on Amazon to find out which manufacturers are reliable. Up until now, he's been mainly criticizing no-name resellers, but recently called out the smartphone manufacturer OnePlus, which offers a USB Type-C port on its flagship OnePlus 2 handset. In a post on Google+, he says users should not buy the company's Type-C to Type-A cable, as it might damage other manufacturers' gadgets. And he notes in a review on Amazon that the company's Type-C adapter for micro USB is similarly defective. And that's another cool thing about USB, well, USB in general, is that USB works on every USB device. So, like, you can buy any USB cable and it just works. It's universal, hence the point, hence the name. USB stands for Universal Serial Bus, so it makes sense then that it would actually be universal. Basically, if it fits, it'll work. And that's great, but sometimes they don't build them up to spec. So Lung's review highlights an important problem for USB Type-C users. Although the standard is certainly the future of the USB standard, it does offer fast data speeds, high power output, and more importantly, a reversible design, kind of like Apple's Lightning or Thunderbolt, whichever one. It seems at the moment that there are plenty of manufacturers who just want to sell the Type-C brand without the actual benefits. So we are in the early experimental cheap days of USB Type-C. To use OnePlus's Type-C adapter as an example, Lung explains that the product does not follow the standard's rules for delivering power. By using this cable, your phone, tablet, or laptop may attempt to draw 3 amps of power, which may be more than micro B or A cable you attach to this adapter may be able to handle, which might cause damage to whatever cable, hub, PC, or charger you plug this into. Lung also adds that this won't have an effect on the OnePlus 2 itself, because the handset doesn't support Type-C fast charging, and the warning is more for owners of Type-C compliant Nexus P, 5X, and Chromebook Pixels. However, it's still not cool to keep that cable around, because the next phone or tablet or laptop you might buy might support 5A or 3A fast charging, and you forget the cable is bad, and you damage a charger sometime in the future, which isn't like really expensive, but it still costs money, and not all of us have that to throw around. So the idea behind fast charging is, well, just that. It's fast charging. What happens is you plug in your charger and it charges faster than normal. Basically, it just draws more power. It draws more amperage from the wall, so you get faster charging. It's not a difficult concept, but previously USB cables weren't rated to do that, and now they are. I'm wondering if we'll ever get to a point where USB cables will just be the cable for everything. For every power adapter, we'll just use USB power. That would be kind of cool, actually. I'm waiting for the day where we have car chargers that you can like you can jumpstart your car with USB. How neat would that be? Especially with like electric cars, that'd be very awesome. What if we could charge our cars over USB? Right, like we'd all have electric cars, and there'd just be USB ports all over the place, like every 10 miles. That would be pretty cool, but unlikely to. Oh well. Now USB cables are one of the better inventions of the last, not even 10, of the last 15 years, because USB is actually kind of old now. It's been around since the late 90s, I think. 98 is when I first started noticing it. Well, I mean, computers from 98. I wouldn't have noticed USB when I was alive in 1998 because I wasn't really privy to that sort of thing when I was 3 years old, but you get the idea. The FBI, by the way, is denying the allegations that they paid off Carnegie Mellon University in order to obtain the identities of Tor users. The FBI is now denying that, saying the allegation that we paid Carnegie Mellon University $1 million to hack into Tor is inaccurate, an FBI spokesperson told Ars Technica in a Friday morning phone call. 2 days ago, the head of the Tor project accused the FBI of paying Carnegie Mellon computer security researchers at least $1 million to de-anonymize Tor users and reveal their IP addresses as part of a large criminal investigation. The FBI spokeswoman Ars Technica spoke to declined to respond to further questions, saying that you should go to a follow-up email and then contact Carnegie Mellon, which Ars Technica actually did. Neither Carnegie Mellon nor the FBI has immediately responded to any inquiries. Hooray. The Tor project has also not immediately responded to any requests for comments. One of the revealed Tor masked IP addresses belonged to Brian Farrell, a Silk Road 2 lieutenant who is due to stand trial in federal court in Seattle later this month. A new filing in Farrell's case, which was first reported on Wednesday by Vice's Motherboard, says that a university-based research institute aided government efforts to unmask Farrell. The Tor project has since patched this vulnerability, so that's nice. It reminds me, though, of the days of the revenuers and the stills in somebody's yard or somebody's woods. It really kind of reminds me of that, where it's not about the morality of it. It's not about, well, this guy shouldn't be doing drugs because think of the children. No, it's about money again. It's what everything really comes down to. Just like during Prohibition, the revenuers didn't really care about you making whiskey. It was that you weren't giving the government money when you were making whiskey, so you shouldn't be able to make whiskey. That's basically the idea, and it's frustrating because there's no morality behind it. There's no ethics behind it, and that does tend to be the case with really all government. I would argue that all government no government really cares about morality or ethics. It's just about the system, because once you get as big as most states are, you don't have time to care about morality. It's just about upholding the rules, because the rules replace morality at some point, where you say like, well, we don't need ethics or morals because we have all these rules to govern us now. It's sort of a very humanistic approach to things where there's not really any set morality. It's just that we've made up these rules that say this is bad to do, so don't do it. And if you happen to break even just one, you've broken the whole system. And that's where we get the idea of rule of law. You know, people keep spouting that and jumping up and down and yelling, but my rule of law. Not understanding that if there was actual true rule of law, we would be arrested pretty much every day because someone breaks the law all the dang time. Everyone has broken the law at some point, and we should all probably be in jail by now. It's just that they haven't caught us yet. Certainly, I should be in jail for a very long time for many different things I've done, but we don't need to get into that. There happens to also be a thing as the Fifth Amendment, which means I don't have to tell you about that. So we'll move on. So in Paris, now this is a different story about Paris that has nothing at all to do with what happened on Friday. But in Paris, the Paris-Orly airport had to close temporarily last Saturday after the failure of a system which happened to be running, now get this, Windows 3.1. Yes, the year is 2015, and an airport was running Windows 3.1, the operating system from 1992. Yeah. French satirical weekly, there we go, Le Canard Enchaîné, I believe. I'm terrible at French, I'm sorry. Reported the failure, and Vice explained it, or expanded on it in the claims. Orly uses a system called Décor to communicate runway visual range information to pilots, or RVR, in poor weather conditions, such as the fog the airport recently experienced on Saturday. The system is essential Last Saturday, it kind of stopped working. Stack overflow, I guess. And the airport struggled to figure out why. Well, this use of ancient systems is not unusual. Vice is quoting Alexandre Fiacre, who's the Secretary General of France's UNSA, IESSA Air Traffic Controller Union. And he's saying that the tools used by Airport de Paris controllers run on 4 different operating systems, all that are between 10 and 20 years old, with Windows 3.1 being joined by Windows XP and some unspecified Unix variation. Oh boy. He also said that the systems are very poorly maintained as well. Moreover, the age of these systems means that it's hard to find staff who can work with them, with Fiacre explaining that we are starting to lose the expertise to deal with that type of operating system. In Paris, we only have 3 specialists who can deal with decor-related issues, and this problem is getting worse as one of them is retiring next year, and we haven't found anyone to replace him. So how about this? Replace your computer system. Never mind the guy. Replace your computer system with something that runs, I don't know, Ruby on Rails or something. Just put Ubuntu on it or anything. Just not Windows 3.1. The thing is, Windows 3.1 back in the 90s was unreliable. So nowadays, it's just as unreliable. And really, you have so many options. It's like, come on, man. I just don't get that sometimes. Because you think that a huge airport like the one in Paris would be a little bit better at finding out, good computer systems to use to run these different things. But some reason, that's just not the case. So this is apparently nothing new either. Whenever the upgrade does happen, they might even switch to something made in this century. That's another thing. That operating system was not even made in the current century. It was barely made at the turn of the century. It's an old operating system. Why would you ever use it? Now, I personally have run Windows 3.1 on real hardware, and it crashes all the dang time. Now, I don't know if that's just my hardware or what, but how can you run an airport on that? It crashes, man. Like, how? Why even is the bigger question. Why would you run an airport on Windows 3.1? There's a new UK law coming out, which is mandating software backdoors and jail for disclosing vulnerabilities, according to Extreme Tech. It's the hottest trend in spooking. Take law-abiding citizens, usually business owners, and use the justice system to compel them into being your enthusiastic deputies. People pitch in by opening their doors both physically and digitally so that the government can make use of any supposed private user data that they might have. The seeming enthusiasm of the I'm having a hard time reading today. The seeming enthusiasm of the collaboration comes from the fact that these same orders make it a crime to reveal this collaboration, so service providers must actively deceive their own users about the true level of privacy which they provide. Now, this is in the UK. Keep in mind, this is not here in the States, but in the UK, that's how it is. UK is kind of dystopian, actually. When you look at its computer systems and how the different networking laws are, it's actually kind of really Orwellian almost, or at least Huxleyan. It's really a frightening place over there in the UK. I wouldn't want to go. I would never want to live in the UK simply for that reason. You have no privacy online in the UK. The UK is a lot more patriotic than I am too. I mean, people in the UK tend to be a little bit more patriotic in that, everything that's done has to be done for the good of the country and for the good of everyone else. And I'm not that way at all. I'm very fend for yourself. Bad luck for you, buddy. That tends to be me. Good luck, bucko. That's me. And so I can't get with that mentality. I don't like the idea of we do things or we're made to do things because it helps other people. I don't like that idea of compulsion. And for some reason in the UK, they love it. I don't get it. Well, now the UK is getting in on the action, as it's been revealed that under the upcoming Investigatory Powers Bill, it will now have the ability to order companies to build software backdoors into their products, and revealing that collaboration could result in up to a year in prison. More than that, the government is also empowering itself to enlist the services of talented individuals like hackers to also legally restrain these people from revealing the work that they have done, even in open court. In the U.S., these orders are usually called national security letters, and they have come to be routinely served to everyone from small business owners all the way up to major corporative executives. So these things are not new. In fact, NSLs have been passed around for years, but for some reason, it's only just now that the press has started talking about it, and me following that, I've only started talking about it a few years ago. but they've been around for quite a long time. Usually it's part of the Patriot Act, I think is what they usually attribute that to. So the Patriot Act was not a very great bill, in case you couldn't tell, but it's not around anymore. Fortunately, we have the USA Freedom Act, which is exactly the same pretty much as the Patriot Act, so really that didn't change at all. It's funny, too, because if you talk to anyone about the Patriot Act, they'll say that, well, that was gotten rid of, though. And it's like, well, yeah, but it was replaced with essentially the same thing. Not a whole lot of things changed, actually, when the USA Freedom Act got passed. So why even bother? Why bother at all? It was a show, really, when the USA Freedom Act got passed. And of course, Bob Corker and Lamar Alexander voted for it because they jump on the national security bandwagon far too often. The bill in the UK, which is widely referred to as the Snoopers Charter, could also mean that citizens subjected to these secretive orders who decide to defy them would be tried by secret courts, not public ones, secret courts, and appeal to secret tribunals with zero public accountability or even disclosure of its decisions. This fundamentally makes resistance impossible. Try to make a stink about what you see as a improper use of government power in the UK, and the UK government may soon be able to respond with a judicial system that not all that different from a black bag over their head. So in the UK, that's just par for the course. And fortunately, it's not that way quite so much here, but we still have a lot of junk that needs to be gotten rid of, especially a lot of laws. Like the USA Freedom Act needs to be just gotten rid of. The DMCA needs to be gotten rid of. There are a lot of different things. The NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, needs to be thoroughly revamped. It needs to be thoroughly revamped. It is awful. The NDAA, by the way, is also the same thing, which gives veterans benefits. So there's not a whole lot of room for getting rid of that, really, because no one's going to back that. Because you look at the NDAA and the first thing everyone sees is, well, benefits and VA, so no one wants to get rid of it. Nobody really sees the whole, we can break into your house if a national emergency is declared. Look at what happened in Paris, actually, in France, where they declared a state of emergency in Paris, or in France. Paris is the capital. They declared a state of emergency in France, and suddenly the military could enter your home. They even talked about that on the news, on TV news. The military can now enter your home. You don't have any real jurisdiction. They have a curfew. France had a curfew for the first time since 1944 on Friday night. So that sort of thing, don't think that it can't happen here, where a national emergency gets declared and suddenly we have martial law. And it's funny because I think that all these uber patriotic guys would sort of just go along with it and say, well, the military knows best. That's the sort of thing, though, that the NDAA authorizes, and that's why it really needs to be gotten rid of. But the Patriot Act, the USA Freedom Act is the same way, and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is much the same way. These are things which restrict you, essentially, and they're by design to restrict you, but most people, for some reason, will defend them because patriotism or whatever. It always comes up to that as, well, I'm a patriot, so I support these different bills, and I'll support the military and all that sort of thing. And it's like, well, there needs to be a limit, though, where, yes, I support military personnel, but I also don't want them breaking into my house because the president has declared executive order that this is now a national emergency. Just saying. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Clutch with Keon Rose is coming up next year on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode.